大家好，因为在没开始之前的话，我先说两句。我是中科院水生所的谢寿奇，非常高兴今天我们一起在一个会场跟他们线上做交流。等会有一个提问的环节，我希望大家踊跃举手。举手提问之前最好先介绍一下自己，让世界人都知道您是谁，好吧？谢谢。等会大家提问的时候会有一个镜头会给大家的。站在这种还是不习惯，有习惯看着那个屏幕。
Good morning, good afternoon, and good night
Good
to
evening.
people
Yeah.
all around the world. Welcome everyone to the parallel session part of the Global Conference on Aquaculture Millennium Plus 20. My name is Rohan Subasinghe, and I will be your facilitator today and tomorrow. To make sure that everyone is in the right place, this is the parallel session stream 2. That is the green stream. This first session will be about aquaculture feeds and feeding. I would like to introduce our local moderator for the session, who will be moderating the room in Shanghai for the participants attending in person in Shanghai. Professor Xi Shuqi of the Institute of Hydrobiology, China Society of Fisheries, whom you know very well, is the one who will be moderating you in China. Let me introduce the 4 presenters. Dr. Brett Glencross currently is the technical director of IFO, the Marine Ingredients Organization. Prior to this, he was the professor of nutrition at the Institute of Aquaculture at the University of Stirling. Brett has over 25 years of experience in the field of fish nutrition. He has honors and master's degrees in biochemistry from the University of Western Australia and a PhD in animal nutrition from the University of Queensland. Our second presenter is Dr. Kang Zhen Mai. Dr. Mai is a highly experienced academician and a researcher and currently serving as a professor at the Ocean University of China. He has published many papers, peer-reviewed manuscripts and journals, and also has won many awards on nutrition. He once served as a vice president of the Ocean University of China. Unfortunately, Dr. Mai will not be able to present in person today. Instead, his presentation will be made by Dr. Glencross. Our third speaker is Dr. Luisa Valente. She is a biologist with more than 25 years of research experience in fish nutrition and sustainable aquaculture. She is a senior scientist and an associate professor at the University of Porto. She is also the director of the Animal Science doctoral program of the university. As of today, she has achieved over 150 publications in international journals and supervised more than 20 PhD theses. The fourth presenter of the day is Dr. Rodrigo Ruba. He has worked in the aquaculture sector over 35 years, mainly in research, teaching, capacity building, development, and policy advice. He has been working with the Brazilian federal government for many years. He holds a PhD in fish nutrition and aquaculture from Auburn University, MSc in freshwater fisheries and nutrition from Brazil, and also owns several specialized diplomas and degrees. The presentation, he is currently serving as the fish nutritionist in the aquaculture group of FAO. The presentations will last about 45 minutes to be followed by a question and answer session. Presenters, Dr. Glencross, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Rohana. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone, depending upon where you are in the world. As Dr. Rohana has just introduced, this is thematic review number 4 of Feeds and Feeding, and we're going to be talking about for the next 45 minutes, harvesting the benefits of nutritional research to address global challenges in the 21st century. I'm joined on the panel tonight by 3 of my 4 colleagues. Kang Zhen Mai, unfortunately, is unable to join us, as Rohana just mentioned, but I will be joined by Professor Luisa Valente, Dr. Rodrigo Rubac, and for the panel session, Dr. Albert Tarkon will join us for the Q&A. Turn on my video. Can you see the video now? How we look at feeds and feeding is really dependent upon how the feed design and feeding technology process comes together. We need to consider requirements and how they influence specifications, but we also need to consider ingredients and how they supply those nutrients. We bring these two bits of information together in a formulation process that involves managing a series of constraints, which is largely a risk management process. This process is then used to define a formulation, which is then used in the feed manufacturing process. And of course, once we manufacture feeds, we then have to manage their delivery. An important truism about nutrition, though, is that animals require nutrients and energy, not ingredients. And there's a range of essential nutrients that must be supplied by the diet. However, nutrients have both a quantitative and a qualitative requirement. They need a certain type of nutrient, but also a certain amount of nutrient to allow animals to perform at their optimal. Okay, I've just been told that you haven't been able to see that screen, so we're going to start again. Hopefully everyone can see now that we have the screen shared. Can everybody see the screen now? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's there now.
Yeah, now it's okay, Brad.
Can you hear me, Graham?
Now it's okay, Brad.
Okay, all good. You can hear me, Rohana?
Yes, yes. Can hear, can see
Okay.
both. Thank you.
Let's take two then. Okay, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending upon where you are in the world today. My name is Brett Glencross, and I'm starting this seminar again. What I'm presenting to you today is thematic review number 4, for which I'm the convening chair with 4 of my co-hosts today. And we're going to be presenting to you a review which is about harvesting the benefits of nutritional research to address global challenges in the 21st century. Joining me on this panel today will be myself. Unfortunately, Professor Kangson Mai is unable to join us, but we'll also have with me Professor Luisa Valente from Portugal, Dr. Rodrigo Rubac from FAO Rome, and for the question and answer session at the end, we'll be joined by Dr. Albert Takon from Hawaii. To begin this journey, though, it's important that we understand how the feed design and feeding technology process works. It begins by understanding what animals need in terms of nutrients and how they contribute together to actually work with ingredients to actually form the basis of feeds. But in that process of developing feeds from understanding the requirements for nutrients and the complexities of ingredients, we bring those sets of information together in a process referred to as formulation. This is largely a risk management process by where we manage a range of constraints to arrive at an idealized combination of ingredients called the formulation, which is then manufactured to make a feed. Those feed particles that are then manufactured, of course, then manage to optimize that delivery of nutrients to the animal. An important aspect about this is that animals require nutrients and energy. They don't require ingredients. And there's a range of essential nutrients that animals obtain from their diet. An important aspect of that, though, is that requirements have both a quantitative and a qualitative dimension. We need a certain amount of a nutrient and a certain inclusion level of that in the diet to enable the animal to perform at its optimum. To deliver those nutrients, we rely on ingredients. And ingredients are largely just assemblages of different nutrients, but they also bring a range of other things which might be nutritionally positive or nutritionally negative. And part of the science in managing ingredients is understanding what we can and what we cannot do with different ingredients. But ingredients bring many different challenges. One of the truisms about ingredients is that they are always variable. The price varies, composition varies, the supply varies. And it's how we manage this supply of raw materials, which is a key part of the feed development process. Ingredients are then manufactured into feeds. We take the combinations of ingredients and we combine them using different types of manufacturing platforms to make different types of feeds that allow us to manage the feeding process. And different types of feeds really allow us to manage the feeding process in different ways, but it's ultimately about how we optimize the delivery of nutrients and energy to the animal. Now, the next presenter was going to be Professor Kangsen Mai, who's going to talk to us about requirements, but unfortunately, he is unable to join us tonight, so I will have to take his place. When we consider nutritional requirements, it's really about understanding these as the basis for feeds and feed design. Animals have different types of requirements. They have a basal requirement, a maintenance requirement, optimal, superoptimal, and toxic levels of supply of nutrients. And it's about identifying where we, not only which nutrient we choose, but what the optimal inclusion level is in the diet that really impacts how we formulate feeds and what ingredients we choose. That combination, of course, of the feed formulation and how it influences ingredient selection then influences the feed manufacture process, which of course flows on to how we supply those feeds and manage the feeding process. However, there's lots of challenges in determining nutritional requirements for aquaculture species. First of all, we're dealing with a lot more species in aquaculture than we do with terrestrial agriculture. We also have a range of other challenges we have to deal with. For example, we're managing animals living in an aquatic environment. So it's hard to sometimes be able to assess food intake, which is a critical part of understanding the nutrition process. We're also dealing with poikilothermic animals, which brings other unique challenges, and also a very high diversity in farm species, feeding habits, trophic levels, farming modes, densities, environments, and so on. So often we have to look at managing feeding in a holistic systems approach rather than just a monoculture approach, as might be considered with terrestrial farming systems. In the past, prior to 2010, most of the work looking at nutrient requirements was really focused on understanding the demands of the key species like carp, shrimp, catfish, and so on for these essential nutrients like energy, protein, and lipid. And that initially brought some really significant gains and improvements in performance, improvements in growth rates, but notably improvements in the economic food conversion ratio, the EFCR. We saw it decrease from very high numbers, coming down to numbers as low as 1.2, 1.8 for many species. But many of these nutrients were determined on a gross nutrient basis only, and they were usually done with studies only working on small animals and working with very highly digestible and palatable ingredients, and usually in optimal environment conditions, like in a laboratory. This information also led to the ability to begin modeling systems, and they were principally initially based on things like factorial bioenergetic processes. As we get to the present day, with understanding the requirements of aquatic animals for nutrients, we begin to start digging deeper to understand the requirements of specific nutrients like amino acids and fatty acids and minerals and so on. And this was really driven by the fact that we began to replace marine ingredients like fish meal and fish oil with plant proteins and plant ingredients. And this exacerbated some of the shortcomings of our understandings of nutrient requirements. Not only that, but there was also differences in the nutrient composition and bioavailability between those marine ingredients and the plant alternatives. Since that period though, in 2010, we've seen smaller improvements in the feed conversion ratio. Only changes from like 1.5 to 2, now decreasing to about 1 to 1.5. And this was largely because we were getting a better understanding of nutritional requirements, but those big early gains had already been achieved. Also in the present time is we also began to look at more of the complexities surrounding nutritional requirements. and how they were influenced by a range of other parameters. Not only were we looking at things like the use of non-fish meal ingredients, as stated before, but we also began looking at the influences of environmental conditions, things like dissolved oxygen, temperature, salinity, also the lab system compared to farming system, the prior nutritional history of the animal, the genotype and the age and size, and how these all interplayed to influence the requirements of aquatic animals. The driving force here, of course, was to reduce feed costs, but also it was about addressing the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Over this period between 2010 and the present day, most of the mainstream species had their requirements relatively well defined, and they also began to be defined in the production farming systems and across various different sizes of animals. However, many of the non-mainstream species and the newer species were still largely unknown in terms of many of their nutritional requirements. Also in the present day, what we also are looking at is that most of the feed formulation and the requirements were initially determined on a gross or crude basis, looking at the absolute supply of nutrients. And more recently, we have begun to refine this by looking at nutrients on a digestible supply basis. And this has really allowed us to really reduce FCR for some of the species which we have more advanced knowledge for species like salmon. It also plays an important part in influencing the formulation, which of course then influences ingredient selection. Also over this decade, we've begun to develop the nutritional modeling systems in a bit more detail, in particular by looking at nutrient flow or demand modeling to better define requirements for a range of key species. These modeling systems have also been readily adopted by the industry in terms of influencing their feed design and also their feed management systems. When we get to the present day, we're also beginning to understand a growing role of the microbiome in nutrient supply and utilization. We see that with aquatic animals, there's an interaction between the animal and its microbiome in its gut and also the formulated feed. But this also interplays with stresses and also the ability to manipulate the microbes in the diet or in the water. However, we still think there's insufficient information to really understand the system well, to really understand the full economic benefits of manipulating the microbiome. Also in the present day, we've been seeing large-scale marine ingredient replacement, and this has been driving the development of functional feeds. We've seen that as we begin to change the feed formulation, it's required not only just to adjust the nutritional additives we include in the feed to balance things like amino acids and fatty acids and vitamins, but we've also had to add things like functional additives like antioxidants, enzymes, and so on to make the feeds perform better in the absence of those marine ingredients. By making these functional feeds, it has allowed us to maintain maximal growth, good immunity, good stress resistance, and also maintain the production of a high quality and a safely produced product. Moving into the future though, what we see is that most of the FCR species, particularly for mainstream species, have been plateauing for some time now. And we're not only seeing, I guess, diminishing returns in advancements for many of these species. What we are going to see going forward though is this limitation to marine ingredients is going to require more non-traditional ingredients to be used. And that is going to introduce complexities in our understanding of the requirements for different animals. We're also going to see changes to the environment, both at a local level in terms of environmental deterioration, but also at a global level in terms of climate change. And we see that there's going to be a demand for functional food for improving not only for the animal itself, but also for the consumers to get a better product and also to provide a healthier product for the vulnerable population. As a consequence of this, we're seeing that these challenges are increasing the stress and then impairing the health of some of the animals. This, in some cases, is leading to a growth retardation and disease outbreaks, which is then driving abuses of antimicrobials, which then brings challenges in food safety and public health issues. We also think we're likely to see more use of controlled environment systems like recirculating aquaculture systems. The future is probably also going to be about precision nutrition. And this involves not only looking at the influences of ingredients and how that influences the requirements of the animals and the environmental conditions, nutritional history, genotype, and age and size, but also the interactions between nutrients, the immunity stasis, and also understanding things like the supply of nutrients and energy on a digestible and net basis using modeling approaches. And we're going to be very reliant on big data in the Internet of Things to enable us to look at these sorts of these systems in a very holistic and comprehensive way. We also believe we're going to see more use of functional feeds into the future. This is about making sure that we maintain maximal growth, that we maintain good immunity, that we maintain high stress resistance, and we keep delivering high quality and safe products to eat. We also look at this being able to produce products that are not only nutritious, but also have some special functions and properties and qualities to allow us to deliver a better product for children, pregnant women, the elderly, and the vulnerable people. Now, I'm going to pass here to my colleague, Luisa Valenta, who's going to talk to us about ingredients. The floor is yours, Luisa.
Thank you, Brett. Well, first of all, good evening, Shanghai. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, so thank you, Fao, for inviting me. I'm going to drive you through the history of ingredients, starting with the past, going through the present, and talking a little bit about the future. So from the late 20th century to 2010, aquafeed production grew from less than 5 million tons to 30 million tons in 2010. However, if you look at the bottom of this graph here, the fish meal and fish oil production could not sustain this growth. And in the figure, in this right side of the presentation, you can see that the fish oil peaked at around 0.9 million tons between 2005 and 2010. And fish meal peaked at 3.6 million tons per annum. So the market was obliged to find alternative ingredients to feed this increased need of feed production. Next slide, please. Brett, next slide. Brett, thank you. So, the limited supply of marine ingredients led to alternative ingredients in aquafeeds, and they were primarily of animal origin because they were available, because of the price and the protein content. But since then, rendered animal byproducts have been restricted in several geographic regions, primarily within the European Union, due to concerns of pathogens and zoonotic disease transmission. Plant proteins were initially a minor contributor to aquafeeds, but they were increasingly being used because they were considered more sustainable. By then, new processing technologies led to the creation of a variety of protein concentrates that were able to compete with the higher price and protein content of fish meal. This was mainly driven by El Niño phenomena that pushed the price of fish meal. And by that time, between 2000 and 2010, for example, the diets for carnivorous fish started using more and more plant proteins that went from 12% inclusion to 28%, whilst fish meal inclusion decreased from 45% to 23% between that period. In omnivorous and herbivorous fish species, plant proteins were already major contributors to aquafeed proteins and lipids. Soybean ranged already between 15 and 45%. The major plant protein sources by that time in carnivorous fish varied between soy, wheat, and corn gluten meals. Next slide, please. Brett, thank you. In present days, so between 2010 and 2020, we approximately produce 60 million tons of aquafeeds, and from these, 4 million tons are from fish meal and only 1 million tons from fish oils. So the rest is mostly plant protein-derived sources. So the aquafeed industry made a huge effort in reducing the contribution of marine ingredients. In the figure in the right side, you can see here this huge decrease in the contribution of marine ingredients. In blue, you can see the contribution of marine fish. In purple, the contribution of salmonids, and in orange, the shrimp that saw a big decrease. So in the cheese in the top, you can see that marine fish and shrimp share the biggest contribution and use the most of the fish meal that's produced at the moment. Major concerns on the utilization of these plant ingredients is increased concern because of soy that's related to deforestation problems. Also, the ingredients' carbon footprint. At the moment, in fact, we assist to a reduced reliance on fish meal and fish oil derived from captured fisheries in aquafeeds. At the moment, byproduct fish meal is contributing to more than 30% of all marine ingredient use in manufactured feeds. So they are becoming more and more sustainable ingredients. So the use of marine ingredients has stabilized since 2010, and now they are seen as more strategic ingredients. Next slide, please. So which alternative ingredients do we have at the moment that can help replace these marine ingredients? We have, in fact, assisting to a panoply of different products coming to the market: fishery and aquaculture byproducts, land animal products like insects and co-products of the food industry, microbial biomass like yeast and bacteria, algae, both micro and macroalgae, lower trophic species like krill, mesopelagic fish, polychaetes, and other genetically modified crops, for example, that can be changed to produce omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, and they can be good replacers of the fish oil. But all these ingredients have to be characterized in terms of nutritional value, in terms of sustainability, in terms of technological readiness level, and in terms of social acceptance. And we have to characterize them in order to be able to see if they can replace either fish meal, either fish oil, and in order to make blends and equilibrated diets to feed aquaculture. Next slide, please. We have put here all these kind of characteristics of these ingredients, and we decided to put here a dot in terms of green, if it can fulfill all these characteristics, yellow so-so, and green and red if it doesn't fulfill the characteristics. And you can see here that none of these ingredients fulfills nutritional value, sustainability, technological readiness level, or social acceptance. So, for example, marine ingredients, in terms of social acceptance, sometimes they are not very sustainable or not very well accepted by in some countries. Insects, for example, they are still very expensive. So in terms of technology, we still need to make some improvements. Yeast, they still need to become more sustainable. The nutritional value sometimes does not fill the requirements of the fish. Macroalgae are very poor in terms of protein content. They lack some important amino acids and omega-3 fatty acids, for example. So technology is there. We still need to improve some of those processes in order to provide the industry enough quantity at competitive price to compete with other ingredients. So we still have a long way to be able to provide the feed industry competitive ingredients and to fulfill the nutritional requirements of the different species that we want to produce. Next slide, please. What we have in the future after 2020? We know that by 2050, aquaculture production is going to double and intensify. Another 50 million tons of resources will be needed. Plant ingredients face major issues: competition for food, feeds, and non-food products such as biofuels, declining availability of fresh water, phosphates, and arable land. Climate change is here. Social and environmental sustainability, notable products from soy and palm oil production. By 2030, on the other hand, more than 1/3 of all fish meal and oil will come from byproduct sources. Critical is to find additional cost-effective ingredients. We need a range of feed additives to supplement, like essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, and trace elements. We need a greater usage of bioactive compounds like prebiotics, probiotics, and other immunostimulants. Next slide, please. The feed for carnivorous species now is predominantly composed of plant proteins and oils. As you can see here, the vegetable components is a big component of all aquafeeds. But you can see here in pink and purple that a greater number of protein sources is becoming part of aquafeeds. But we need crystal essential amino acids to create a balanced diet to support high performance and healthy fish. We need to process and produce protein concentrates to maximize protein concentration, to maintain quality and suitability, minimizing the non-nutritive factors. So the aquafeed industry now has a broader raw material array that brings more resilience to supply chain threats. The feed sector is less reliant on any one ingredient. Problems with the vegetable sources, soy and deforestation, and carbon footprint that compete with land use, food feed competition, competition with biofuel production, and climate change. Next slide, please. So the future absolutely needs to increase the use of alternatives. We see great potential of non-traditional protein and oil sources, especially those part of the circle bioeconomy. Insects, food waste, and microbial biomass can be good options. Single-cell ingredients offer the most potential as biotechnology advances. We see increasing pressure to use local ingredients. Adoption of nutrient recycling following circular bioeconomy, the use of innovative raw material processing techniques, and use of renewable energies for processing such ingredients. Next slide, please. It's my last slide. Brett. So future trends. We all know that by 2050 will be 10 billion. The animal protein needs to increase by 52%. Aquaculture will play an increasing role in meeting global protein need. Consumers will gravitate to our products that align with their attitudes, preference, and expectations. Food safety will become an increasing important issue. Consumers will value origin, sustainability, and nutritional content. Mandatory and voluntary labeling will be strong drivers of the seafood market. So, sustainability of feed ingredients is becoming a growing issue. We need to focus on sustainability of the feed ingredient supply chains rather than on individual ingredients. For example, fish meal can be supplied sustainably if it comes from sustainable managed fisheries or from byproducts. Soy can also be farmed sustainably if it's produced on land that was not recently converted from native vegetation. We need to use certification schemes to verify sustainability claims, and this will grow and become more and more complex. For example, we need to address issues of human rights, carbon footprint, land and water use. Sustainable feed ingredients varies depending on the type of ingredients, as their social, economic and environmental impacts all differ considerably. We need to harmonize sustainable certification standards to ensure consistency. Finally, we need to adopt certification schemes to reduce and eliminate ingredients from unsustainable sources. I want to finish my presentation saying that without commitment from the market, changes will be hard to implement and value, and this will depend on all of us. So we must become more and more responsible on our choices. So I leave you with my next speaker, Rodrigo Robac, that's talking about management and manufacturing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Luisa. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone there in Shanghai or either in online this presentation. Thank you all for this opportunity. And I'm Rodrigo Robac, Senior Aquaculture Officer at FAO headquarters, and I will present feed management and manufacturing as the third part of the thematic review on aquaculture, feed and feeding. Feed rationing systems and management of how much and when feed was delivered to the animal were largely based on prior experience or demand-based, relying on the animal providing feedback to the person feeding them. Still in the past, before 2010, most feeding was manual, using hand, blower, or other simple delivery systems. As such, feeding was a labor-intensive process. Diet was selected based on price or feed manufacturer recommendations focused on fish growth. Assessments of animal behaviors and interactions with feeds and the feeding process were somewhat subjective. Those for certain species, some simple tools like feed trays were used to assist the process. Next, please. So in the past, still before 2010, historically, many feeds were based on the use of trash fish and or made on farm by the farmers. These may have initially been fed as intact trash fish or made into moist mesh with the use of other materials and binders, or made into dried pellets using simple pelleting manufacturing systems. With the growth and increasing technical demands on the sector, specialist feed compounders emerged and brought advancements in the various processes used in feed manufacturing. Additionally, the feed manufacturing sector played an important role in helping farmers, not only in the provision of feed inputs, but more importantly, in the management of the feed on the farm and in the use of appropriate environmentally sound husbandry practices. Next, please. So what we see in the present day, that's between 2010 and 2020, we are able to observe from that the feed management and manufacturing in the sector that feed management systems in technologically advanced sectors are becoming increasingly computerized, mainly with the modern development of world aquaculture. We have seen a number of automated, centralized pneumatic feeding systems using in-cage cameras and computer-based decision-making tools, more widespread, resulting in a reduced level of labor. However, in the developing world, where the majority of aquaculture still occurs, feeding is still largely a manual controlled and managed process, with important labor demands and continues to be a significant rural employer. With that, the interpretation of the feed responses is experience-based and depends on the experience and skills of individual farmer. We also observe that the use of growth and energetics models are increasingly being applied for the evaluation and management of feeding regimes for various species. And the application of modeling helps reduce both the feed cost and the waste being discharged. But strictly, modeling focus only on evaluating the feeding rates, but increasingly, diet formulation, environmental factors, feeding frequency, feeding rhythm, and even animal behavior are all being taken into consideration. Next, please. So still in the present, we still observe manufacturing of feeds in developed world is now mostly based on modern institutional technologies. So there has been considerable development of engineering technological capabilities in this area, allowing considerable control over the forming, cooking, and densification attributes of the feeds. But despite these advancements and the increasing level of industrialization of feed manufacturing, some sectors, for example, the shrimp farming, have still tended to stay with manufacturing approaches like pelleting, while other sectors in the developing world, particularly small-scale aquaculture operations, have continued to use on-farm mesh feed manufacturing approach. And for a number of reasons, in the developing world, there is still widespread use of pelleting, mesh, and trash fish feeding, especially on farm, although extrusion is increasingly being used by commercial feed suppliers in these parts of the world. Next. So in the future, after 2020, to increase sustainability of fish production and optimize fish product quality and animal welfare, it's become even more important to monitor and control the animal production process. By reducing the feed conversion ratio, as we seen in the presentations, farmers will have waste to the water when they farm in, and they will tend to reduce their overall carbon footprint. But to achieve this, we need a better understanding of feed intake and its physiological points of regulation and how this is affected by production systems, and a range of other abiotic factors. Also in the future, we see an increasing use of mechanized and automated feeding in developing world, matching that already being undertaken in much of the developed world. This use of mechanized and automated feeding and will aid in improving production efficiency, though less wastage, and animal growth rates through higher intakes, by allowing for better alignment of feeding with the needs of the animals being farmed, but will correspondingly reduce labor demands and employment in the sector. Already there are signs of increasing use of autonomous feeding systems in the developing world, occurring through development of a variety of low-cost automatic feeding systems. And also, we see in the future the use of artificial intelligence in feeding systems emerging. AI is going to impact the business of all shapes and sizes across all industries, and the increasing use of centralized computer-controlled feeding systems engaged upon sensors and cameras will increasingly make an Internet of Things systems of control more feasible for feeding aquaculture species. The development of complex algorithms and AI that monitors feeding behavior will be used to help make decisions about feeding management, coupled with more precisely defined energy and nutrient demands over various size classes, environmental genotypes, and in situ biologgers. The inclusion of a precision nutrition approach will complement completely automated feeding. And the use of automation and AI will lead to precision and smart farming, increasingly becoming a focus. The use of big data application may play a major role in improving the efficiency of the entire supply chain with focus on food security, safety, and sustainability. Next slide. So this in the future will provide an increasing focus on the application of principles of precision fish farming, PFF, to shift feeding management from compromising largely experience-driven process to become a more knowledge-driven procedure. Biological and system informatics will become combined to increase the precision control of fish farming. The use of intelligent sensors and monitoring will support the application of predictive models and simulation systems, leading to improved decision management and integration of operations that will enhance the overall precision control of fish farming operation. The optimal solution should be the use of real-time techniques that can determine the actual feeding behavior of fish. Therefore, to ensure efficiency feeding in aquaculture is necessary to develop a smart feeding regime system that can analyze the appetite status of farmed fish. With that, I thank you for your attention. And I will hand back to the floor to Mr. Brett Glencross for the next presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rodrigo. Moving on to the summary now. We began this journey by understanding how feed design and feeding technology works, understanding how it is a process of bringing knowledge sets about requirements and how they influence specifications, together with knowledge about ingredients and dealing with and managing their variability. We use this process to manage this called formulation, which allows us to interact with those two different knowledge sets through two different windows, the nutrient window and the ingredient window. And we basically are required to manage a series of constraints in what is largely a risk management process to derive a formulation, which we then manufacture and then use those feeds to manage the nutrient delivery process to the animal. We have also seen over the past 20 to 30 years there have been big changes and massive improvements in things like the performance efficiencies of feeds. But in recent years, we're seeing converging EFCR values, particularly for the mainstream species, and we are seeing diminishing returns in terms of the efficiency of those feeds. However, this is not the case for many of the new and novel species, for which many of the requirements are still unknown. As we heard, the future will be about precision nutrition. This is about understanding how a range of different factors contribute to understand the requirements of aquatic animals for nutrients. How we consider not only the ingredients, the environment, the animal's nutritional history, its genotype, and its age, but we also consider that within the context of digestible and net energy systems, using dynamic and mechanistic models to understand nutrient interactions and also how requirements can improve the immunity status of animals. We've also heard how the future is about functional feeds and how through using functional feeds, we can gain flexibility in the raw materials that we use to make sure that we maintain maximal growth, good immunity, good stress resistance, and produce high quality and safe products. But we also then have aquatic products that we produce that are not only nutritious, but can have some special functions and qualities. And this enables us to deliver a nutritionally superior product for all parts of the population. We have also heard that the future needs additional ingredients. We need new sources of protein to supply both essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. We also need new sources of energy and omega-3. We've seen how over the last 30 years, we moved from a system that was initially quite reliant on marine ingredients to one now that marine ingredients make up less than 10% of feed production globally. They are now seen as strategic ingredients, with the majority of nutrient supply from ingredients coming from plant materials. As we've seen over the last 30 years, we've seen a changing ingredient base, which also brings with it changing issues. Ironically, if we look back to the past, our carbon footprint historically was quite small. Presently, it's much bigger than it used to be. Where we go in the future depends upon many of the decisions we make now. But there's increasing expectations on what we place on our ingredient and our choices here. We need ingredients that are nutritious, have enhanced qualities, are safe, are responsible, and are low cost. And we're moving away from systems like the FIFO into life cycle assessments to better understand the true impact associated with our ingredient choices. We've also heard that the future needs further adoption of modern manufacturing technologies. Modern manufacturing processes allow for improved control over the physical and nutritional qualities of feeds. This leads to better feed management and a more effective nutrient delivery to the animal. There's a range of different technologies that are being applied to feed manufacturing, but extrusion and pelleting are still widely applied across most species. In the developing world, though, there is still widespread use of both mash and trash feeding systems on farms, although extrusion and pelleting systems are increasingly being used in that part of the world by the commercial feed sector. And we've also heard that the future needs better understanding of animal behavior, an increased focus on understanding the processes, the principles of precision fish farming to allow us to become more knowledge-driven than experience-driven. We also need to look at these biological and system informatics to increase our precision control over the fish farming process. And by using some of the Internet of Things and these AI technologies, we should be able to develop some real-time techniques that can actually determine the actual feeding behavior of the fish in real time. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And on behalf of the presenting panel, myself, Professor Kangsen Mai, Professor Luisa Valenta, and Dr. Rodrigo Rubach, we thank you for your participation tonight.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glenn Cross, Dr. Mai, Dr. Valente, and Dr. Rubach for excellent, very informative presentation on the feeding, the present, and the future. Now that ends the presentation, and this brings us to the questions and answers session. until we end around 5 o'clock my time, we will engage with you in the panel discussion with some questions for you for further elaboration and explanation and discussion. As Brett mentioned, that we have Dr. Albert Taken with us, who did not make presentations, but who will be joining with the panel discussion. Dr. Taken is the owner and founder of Aquahana LLC based in Hawaii and works as an aquatic feeds and nutrition consultant all over the world. His expertise has taken him to working in over 49 countries and has over 250 scientific publications and 1 patent in his sleeves. He holds a BSc in Botany and Zoology from University of London and a PhD in fish nutrition from the University of Wales. He serves on the editorial boards of several scientific journals. Welcome, Dr. Taken. The panel discussion will look like this. For our virtual participants, please type your questions into the question and answers box inside the Zoom. You will find the icon at the bottom of your screen. For the participants joining the conference venue in Shanghai, Professor Shoki will collect your questions and then read them into the facilitator or to the secretariat or invite participants to state their questions. Dr. Shoki, I guess we have quite a few people physically attending from China. Am I right? All right, let's see. Yeah, please do collect questions from the participants and we will come back to you in a minute. We may not get all of the questions during this panel session, but the Secretariat will collect these questions and provide them to the authors of the review for their consideration while finalizing the thematic review. I think it is time for us to now start questions. Since Dr. Taken did not say a word so far, Albert, I have a first question to you. The question to you is, the reduction in fish meal and fish oil use across the sector is a major success story. How far can it go and how far is it likely to go? Thank you.
Thank you, Rohanna.
So please, your question, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes maximum answer. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rohanna, for the question. As Brett said during his presentation, fish and shrimp have a requirement for nutrients, not ingredients. And so one of the things that's happened is, as we've better understood the nutrition and the physiology of the species we culture, we realized that fish meal as an ingredient was perfect in that it had more or less all the individual nutrients that the fish or shrimp requires. Now what we do is that we can supply them with different nutrient sources. And so really it's in terms of the essential fatty acids, DHA, EPA, fish oil is really the only commercial source available during the present day, although we do have algal oils coming in the pipeline, and the price will come down. So really that's the realization, is that fish meal and fish oil is still widely available in many countries, including in the Asian region where the bulk of the aquaculture production is realized. And so until these, until the supply side goes down, it's still there, it's available for people to use, and so that's why they still use it. But obviously, as we develop more tendencies towards more sustainable ingredient sources, more less impact with greenhouse gases and so forth, it's going to change. But as an ingredient, it's a perfect ingredient for most of the carnivorous species that we grow. But as we saw with Louise's presentation, the bulk of the ingredients used within feeds at the moment for most cultured species are plant-based ingredient sources.
Thank you very much, Albert, for that answer. Thank you. We have a question from the audience. I will sort of, Brett, this question could be yours. It's a long question and a statement. Should we not speak of adding new feed ingredients to marine ingredients rather than replacing them? Unless demand for feed is projected to diminish in the coming years, and it does not seem to so, it seems all feed ingredients are desperately needed, especially the very effective marine ingredients, as long as they can prove to be sustainable. Your thoughts, please.
I tend to agree with that statement. I think that was one of the key messages that we presented, and certainly the data that Louisa presented was very much driven around that we need new additional ingredients to the marine ingredients we have. One of the great things about marine ingredients is this multiplier factor. We use, 5 million tons of fish meal and we make it into 60 million tons of fish. That's a fantastic, loaves and fishes story in many respects. For me, it's not about if they're sustainable. The last 10 years have shown us that most of these major forage fisheries we're using have maintained the population at stable levels. They're being very sustainable. And there's independent metrics to now confirm that, like responsible sourcing programs and the like. But you're right, they will continue to be part of the banquet on the table going into the future, but our ability to increase marine ingredients is limited. So we need additional ones to bring to the table. And that's what Louisa was talking about, things like the insects, the algal meals, the single cell products, the plant meals. But we need all of them. And they all have a place or a role to play in the story, I think.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you very much. The questions are coming, and I think, yes, we will have a good discussion. A short question coming in the question and answers box. The question is, wait a minute. So it's gone, right. Okay, the question is, what the main constraints if we use plant ingredients, especially for freshwater fish species? What's the best methods of reducing to minimize problems from plant ingredients? Shall I direct it to Louisa, please?
Well, I guess it depends on the species that you are farming. Freshwater species can be carnivorous, omnivorous, herbivorous. I think that's the big challenge of aquaculture. We were discussing when we were preparing the presentation. In aquaculture, the number of species that's produced worldwide is amazing. Only in China, I don't remember exactly the number that were produced at the moment, but was like hundreds of different species that were produced. So every species that we start producing, we need, first of all, to know the requirements. So depending on the requirements, the best ingredient have to be selected. If a species is herbivorous, maybe a plant ingredient is adequate. As you could see, some herbivorous species can feed very well on plant ingredients without any constraints. They don't really need any other sources. So it really depends on the fish species that they are going to be farmed. If you are talking about carnivorous species, that's another story. Then you need to make sure that, again, we are not talking about ingredients, we are talking about nutrients. You have to make sure that all nutrients that the species requires are in the diet.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Shoki, do we have any questions from China, from Shanghai?
首先谢谢各位精彩的报告。那么中国是水产养殖的大国，未来的水产饲料的发展，应该以可持续、高效率的供给为基础，以水产动物的精准营养为抓手，突出动物养殖的养殖目标，更加注重环境友好和持续发展。我想我们在座的各位也应该有很多问题和大家交流。哪位先举手？先做个自我介绍。
各位专家晚上好，我是来自中国水产科学研究院长江水产研究所的李创举。我的问题是关于这个管理与制造这个主题的，就说在这个水产养殖中，随着这个精准营养水平、自动化水平和智能化水平的提高，养殖雇员将大幅减少。这将对这个水产养殖业带来什么样的影响？谢谢。
Did you get the question?
I didn't get the English version. I tried the interpretation, but it didn't come through. Was it possible to just?
Okay, I can repeat the question.
That would be great.
With the development of precise nutrition and the intelligence of aquaculture, the employees will decrease very much, as you talked just now. How this will affect the aquaculture industry in the future?
Oh, very interesting question. Who could answer that? Brett, can you get one of your panel members to answer that question? Interesting question.
It's a pity we don't have our friend Kang Samai here, because I think this would be a really good question for him to answer. But Rodrigo, would you like to have a go at this one? Just to share
I can try. Not sure if I'm going to address the whole. I can try to address this issue. I think that precision feeding, the use of precision technology and towards the whole feed and manufacturing industry, it's going to, and specifically for the farmers. And as we see that most of our production still comes from the small and medium farmers, that will be the challenge, to have all those technological advancements available to them. And for that, I believe that with further advancements of the use of small devices like those smartphones and applications on those devices will provide useful for those small and medium farmers, since they're more constrained for cost-wise in the way that they can adopt the technology. So with that, they might be able to do some precision tuning there in order to have on board those advancements. But of course, the partnership within the industry and the overall capacity training should be a pivotal issue there to help those farmers to embrace the technology that's available there. Back to you, Brett. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you. Right. I also saw Dr. Mai in the screen, but maybe not available now. Right. There are a couple of other questions coming up. There's a question about subsea feeding versus normal feeding. I must confess that I'm also not very familiar with this, but Brett, again, can you sort of get one of your colleagues to answer. It's about subsea feeding against the normal feeding. Which one is better? Which one is more complex?
Subsea feeding. Well, I would pass it to Rodrigo, but he probably needs to give his voice a bit of rest. Subsea feeding, I'll take this one if you don't mind, Rodrigo. A bit more complex than surface feeding. It requires clearly a lot more capital investment, and therefore is more difficult to apply more broadly across the world. This would be, to me, this is a let's consider this and see where it goes. I think there has some advantages for it for some species, but certainly not all species.
Thank you. Yes, it is. It's more capital in, sort of a intensive system, sort of definitely requiring special equipment and things, I guess, right? Right. There's another question. Do we need to re-evaluate nutritional requirements availability based on genetic strains, intensification, and use of biofloc systems? Albert, would you be able to answer that?
Yes, I think we will have to for some species. Obviously, species like shrimp and tilapia, which are able to filter particulate matter from the water column, in a floc system, obviously they can derive a lot of their nutrition from the biofloc within the system. And so there's potential savings there. The other aspect, I think you said apart from biofloc was, can you refresh me, Rohana?
Basically asking, sorry. The biofloc systems and intensification, genetic strains, and biofloc systems. Those are the three.
Sure. I mean, to reply to the genetic strains, yes.
Yeah.
I know that some of the genetic programs to produce SPF shrimp, for example, one of the selection criteria is tolerance to soybean meal, for example. This is within some of the programs here in Hawaii. And so obviously, as this genetic strains are developed, nutrient requirements will change slightly. And so we have to always be continually refining them.
Thank you.
Also just to add on that one, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Also with shrimp and many species, you have a move where the industry is moving indoors in the same way that the poultry sector did, to have an environment which is more stable, more controlled. And obviously for these recirculation systems, indoor systems, we also have to make even better diets in terms of using highly digestible ingredients. So I think it's work in process. We're always continually evaluating the nutrient requirements.
Thank you. Yes, definitely, because we are going more and more into genetic selection, genetic, sort of improvements in species, and sort of definitely. Can I go back to Shanghai? Dr. Shoki, do you have any other questions coming? If you can please say it in English, that would be great.
So the questions are coming.
大家好，我来自湖州师范学院，我叫徐其友。感谢几位专家精彩的报告。我想问一下啊，虽然各位专家刚才已经讲了很多啊，我还是想再问一遍，就是未来水产饲料业的主要挑战是什么？我们是否有那么多的原料来满足水产饲料业的快速发展？从科研工作者对我们来说，我们应该关注哪些内容开展我们的研究？谢谢。
Okay, I just repeat the question. So, what are main challenges for the future aquaculture feed? And do we have enough ingredients? and what should be focused in the academic research in the future?
Yes, this time I also got it with the interpreters. That was nice. Can I direct that question to Dr. Valente, please? Louisa.
Well, I think we should look to every possible ingredient that we could put our hands on. And what I suggest, and I've been looking into the chat here, into the presentation, is that depending on what part of the world you are living on, and depending on what the availability, looking at the local resources could be a major issue here. Because depending on where the feed industries are, you have to focus on local productions, because in fact you have very different situations and different species being produced in different parts of the world at very different scales. So I've been looking into the chat here. You have very big productions, multinationals, but you have local and traditional productions as well. So maybe trying to look at the local ingredients in order to reduce the carbon footprint. Ingredients travel immensely along our planet. So now we have to look at the carbon footprint at the chain. It doesn't matter. We cannot talk about the soy footprint or fish meal footprint, because we can have fish meal that's sustainably obtained and fish meal that's completely unsustainable. It depends how it is obtained. So we have to start using those certification schemes and to have this process completely certified, and maybe to start looking at all those processes and have that process certified. So start thinking locally. I know that we live in a global economy, but COVID also start putting us thinking, and a lot of things started and stopped traveling with COVID. And when we stopped traveling, we had to rely on the things that we could have locally. And a lot of ingredients can buy. And for example, byproducts from agro-food wastes that are produced locally can be transformed locally and can be very nice ingredients that can be used in aquafeeds. And tons of agro-food byproducts are wasted every year, and they can be very valuable ingredients for many species, as long as they are used safely, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Louisa. Thank you. Excellent. Yes, there's definitely a lot of challenges, particularly looking at the smallholders in developing world, rural Africa, sort of trying to get them good feed accessible. I have another question. It's a long question. In many developing countries, several countries in West Africa and also particularly, accessibility of fairly priced aquafeed is a challenge for smallholders. Feed companies do not want to invest in plants as long as the fish volume produced is not significant, but the fish production will not increase significantly as long as feed is not accessible. How to break this barrier? What role can FAO play? Since FAO is mentioned, the question goes to Rodrigo.
Thank you, Hannah, to have this opportunity to answer this one. Yes, I agree with the with the assessment of this question. Well, feed price for fish feed prices, it's always been a challenge, and which is because it's mostly the price for the whole production itself, the aquaculture productions, sometimes around 60 to 70% of the price of the production. So in those countries that we need to either import those fish feeds, or which are not available, at least are not the right quality. I think it's a matter not only we need to look not only the final price of the feed in itself, if you have it available or not, but also if it's how well do you manage your system there? How well you know how you're producing from your aquaculture setting there, if it's been profitable or not. That's a huge need to know, because sometimes, most of the time, for those small, medium farmers, they hardly had the adequate training and the adequate tools to assess those how much they are really what they're producing, if they're producing in economic settings that it's favorable to them or not. But back to the question for those countries that still the aquaculture sector has not been catching up due to those difficulties. I would take on from the experience from the Brazilian aquaculture sector in the early days in the 70s and 80s, when those small farmers didn't have a way to do those produce enough and they didn't find the adequate feeds there. They did get together in cooperatives in order to have the adequate training for the whole setting for aquaculture, as well as put together their resources to make better feeds. So what's in the question for what role FAO can play, I think that we are trying to do that. Our member countries, whoever they want to improve their aquaculture sector, we are there to provide them adequate guidance, scientific-based guidance as well, in order to make assessment of what they have, what they should or what they can produce in a way that's feasible, and what way that they make the best way and the best use of their resources. And I would bring attention also for the circular economy, as Luisa pointed as well. We have, those countries have several resources that's underutilized sometimes. And those resources need to be proper investigated to use in those, in regional settings or small settings, so small regions that have those opportunities to do aquaculture. So I think that's the best way around to get the sector growing. Wherever you are, whatever you need to make that thing happen. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you very much. By looking at the clock, we have about time for 3 more questions. So I will, we have few questions. We won't be able to answer everything, but I'll select 3 and direct to 3 other panelists to finish. This question is to Albert. The question is, how much trash fish feeding is still occurring, and why are those sectors not transitioning to manufactured feed? Albert. 2 minutes, please.
2 minutes. It depends obviously on the species. Species like tuna, the nutrient requirements are still poorly understood. And so I know the industry in many parts of the world uses pelagics to forage fish to feed the. In terms of the countries using trash fish, China, again, for the mandarin fish, uses a certain amount. But again, as we home down on the nutrient requirements of the species, I mean, certainly the feed manufacturing technology there is available already to produce large pelleted feeds for tuna. But obviously what the industry has to do is to start from the hatchery and produce the juveniles, and then it's going to be a lot easier. So I think really it's just a matter of time. We as an industry have got to use more feed grade ingredients as opposed to food grade ingredients. Mm-hmm. Even soybean is food grade, you know, so the future, like Louisa was saying, is using more of the resources that we have in our own countries, and especially in Africa, you know, using fermentation technologies with copra, with palm kernel cake, you know, we can really make those nutrients more biologically available. And just to end it, sorry, just because, you know, at the end of the day, aquaculture is, we have to compete. We have over 1 billion tons of animal feed for the terrestrial livestock sector, who are also in the same boat as we are, looking for ingredients, looking at tomorrow and how they're going to survive. So I think in the end, we have to, you know, look at the whole sector as a whole.
Thank you very much, Albert. Very interesting. Let me direct the last question to Shanghai. Dr. Shoki, do you have your last question?
So the question is coming.
那个主持人好，有机会得到最后一个问题，我是来自中国江西农业大学的，我想问一下，要进一步减少入食性鱼类对鱼本鱼油的食用量，哪些方面能进一步取得突破？谢谢。
Dr. Shoki, you have to translate that for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I just repeat the question. So
Please.
how, simply the question is how to reduce the
I did not hear.
No, did I? Yeah.
Can you repeat, please?
microphone is off now.
Okay, now it's okay. Go ahead, please.
No?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The question is how to reduce the inclusion of fish meal and fish oil for carnivorous species.
Brett, give a try.
I think there's many strategies that you could take to trying to reduce the fish meal and fish oil. And fundamental comes down to understanding the needs of the animal for nutrients and energy. Once you understand what the animal needs in terms of nutrients and energy, then you can use a range of ingredients to supply that. But you also need to assess the ingredients for the nutrients they actually supply. And what I mean by that is you have to assess the nutrients on a digestible or net basis. Not the composition, but what part of that nutrient, of the ingredient, the animal actually gets access to. The other critical part, if you want to go down the path of trying to replace marine ingredients, is trying to manage palatability. You know, Albert mentioned before, one of the great things about fish meal is it gives you this perfect balance of nutrients, as well as being one of the best intake or feed intake stimulators of all ingredients we have. So it's a sort of a bit of a dual package. Not many other ingredients do that. So if you want to start relying, say, solely on plant products, you have to balance your diets for the nutrients they need, do it on a digestible or net energy basis, and make sure that you add something to the feed that ensures the appetite is stimulated. Do that, and I think you'll find there's examples around the world with sea bass, shrimp, salmon, many other carnivorous species where we can replace marine ingredients right now, and it's already been shown at a commercial level. The reality is it's just not commercially cost effective or makes sense to. You know, so long as we have sustainable marine ingredients, we should keep using them.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you very much. Right, by looking at the clock, we have one last question. I think I'm going to direct that to Louisa. The question is there any success story or are there any success stories in the use of fresh algae and pelletized algae ingredients into herbivorous species?
In which species that I did not follow you?
Herbivorous species, plant feeders.
Oh, yes. Algae are used in a lot of species like tilapia, for example. We've been using algae. The problem of algae is that they are expensive. So the production of seaweeds or microalgae is very expensive still. So nowadays they are more seen not as an ingredient, but as an additive. Algae has a lot of bioactive compounds that can be used as functional ingredients to produce and to make the fish more resistant to stress, and to combat, for example, climate change. Nowadays, we assist to a lot of changes in temperature, water temperature, for example, and a lot of studies have demonstrated that fish can cope better if they are fed these diets that include certain
I'm sorry, we
quantity.
have to close the session, otherwise interpretation will stop.
okay,
Thank you.
okay.
Sorry to
Okay. So as functional ingredients, yes, we have very nice stories about the use of algae.
Thank you. Thank you, Louisa. I think that's time. We don't have any further time for the discussion. We need to stop in another minute and a half time. I thank everyone, all the 4-5 panelists, and also Dr. Shoki, who is sitting there with the local participants live, sort of joining us, and also hundreds of virtual attendees of the conference. Thank you very much. Very interesting session on feed ingredients and feeds and feeding, and also the panel discussion. Thank you, everyone. Good night, good morning, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye
好，也
bye.
谢谢大家，希望我们以后多交流。
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Please join us again tomorrow
Yes, yes, of
for
course.
genetics.
Of course, tomorrow for genetics and health.
Recording stopped.